The postman had no way of knowing the letter he delivered that day was 20 years too late, and that it carried within its faded ink a secret that would scream from the grave. In the quiet, unassuming town of Oakwood, where generations lived and died on the same tree-lined streets, the past was about to exhale a frozen breath, thawing a mystery that had long been given up for dead. Our story begins not with that letter, but 2 decades earlier, with a woman named Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was the kind of person who painted a room with her presence, a vibrant local artist in her mid-30s, known for her sprawling, chaotic gardens and her equally sprawling generosity. She had a laugh that could cut through the murmur of a crowded coffee shop and eyes that seemed to hold a universe of kindness. Her husband, Thomas Vance, was her opposite in every way. A quiet, meticulous man, an accountant whose world was one of balanced ledgers and predictable outcomes. Theirs was a marriage that friends described as complementary, though some privately wondered if Thomas S. stoic calm ever felt like a cage to Eleanor S. free spirit. Their only child, a daughter named Chloe, was away at her first year of college, a fact that left the large Victorian house feeling emptier than usual in the autumn of 1998. On the night of November 12th, Thomas Vance called the police, his voice a strained monotone of controlled panic. He'd returned home from a late meeting, he said, to find the back door ajar and the house silent. Eleanor was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, he insisted. Her purse was on the counter, her car in the driveway. Only her favorite paint-stained jacket was missing. The initial investigation painted a picture of a perplexing vanishing act. There were no forced entry points, no fingerprints that shouldn't have been there, no angry ex-lovers or disgruntled associates. Detective Mark Rojas, a young, dogged investigator with a knack for details, felt a nagging unease. The scene was too clean, too passive. A home invasion with no theft, an abduction with no witness, no noise, no struggle. It felt less like a random act and more like a carefully staged performance. The prime suspect from the very beginning was Thomas. The husband always is. But Thomas had an alibi. A dinner with a client that checked out, confirmed by a receipt and a waitress with a good memory. He was the picture of grieving cooperation, his sorrow a quiet, contained thing that never spilled into messy hysterics. He answered every question, submitted to every search. Without a body, without a weapon, without a single shred of concrete evidence, the investigation stalled and then stagnated. The file grew dusty on a shelf, and Eleanor Vance became another name on a list of the vanished, her case kept alive only in the heart of her now-grown daughter, Chloe, and the restless mind of Detective Rojas, who had long since been promoted out of the department but never truly left the case behind. Life moved on. Thomas Vance sold the house and moved away, the ghost of his wife seemingly exorcised by distance. The town of Oakwood learned to speak of Eleanor in the past tense, that is, until a demolition crew, tasked with tearing down the old Vance home to make way for a new development, found something. Wedged behind a baseboard in the master bedroom closet, hidden in a gap that had been covered by a shoe rack, was a sealed envelope, addressed simply to Chloe. It was Eleanor's handwriting. The letter, brittle and yellowed, was dated November 11th, 1998, the day before she disappeared. The cold case unit, now headed by a seasoned detective named Maria Flores, handled the fragile paper with the reverence of a holy text. This was not a frantic note. It was a thoughtful, heartbreaking message from a mother to her daughter. She wrote of her pride, her love, her hopes for Chloe's future, and then, nestled between lines of affection, was the sentence that changed everything. Ivy decided to finally tell your father I am leaving. His silence these past few months has been colder than any anger. I found the statements for the account I never knew we had. I think he's been planning for this too. Don't worry, my love. I'll be safe at the studio until I can figure this out. The narrative of the quiet, grieving husband shattered. Eleanor hadn't been taken by a stranger. She had been planning to leave him. Thomas's meticulousness, the very trait that defined him, had been his undoing. He must have discovered her plan. The late meeting was a fabrication. The staged home invasion now made perfect, horrifying sense. Detective Flores and her team, with a renewed fervor, descended on Thomas Vance, now a retired man living a quiet life 3 states away. They re-examined his financial records from 2 decades prior, and this time, with the letter as a guide, they found it: a secret bank account. He had been quietly siphoning money from their joint assets for months. Eleanor's discovery threatened not just his marriage, but his entire carefully constructed world of control. The motive was no longer a mystery. It was laid bare in black and white. The arrest was quiet. There was no dramatic struggle. Thomas Vance answered the door, looked at the detectives, and simply nodded, as if he had been waiting for them for 20 years. The trial that followed was a masterclass in quiet horror. The prosecution painted a picture of a controlling man who would rather destroy his wife than let her go. The letter was the star witness, its voice from beyond the grave echoing through the silent courtroom. Thomas's defense was a weak tapestry of denial and character assassination, attempting to paint Eleanor as unstable and the letter as a fantasy. But the foundation was rotten. The climax came when Chloe Vance, now a woman with her mother's eyes, took the stand. She spoke of her father's coldness in the days following her mother's disappearance, of how he'd quickly packed away her things, of how he'd discouraged her from talking to the police. She held the jury in a rapt, painful silence. Then the prosecutor asked her about the letter. As she read the final, loving lines aloud, her voice broke. "I'll be safe at the studio until I can figure this out." The weight of those words, the tragic irony of that promise of safety, hung in the air. It was the final, damning blow. Thomas Vance, the man who had hidden his crime behind a veil of normalcy for 2 decades, showed his first and only flicker of emotion. Not remorse, but a tight, furious grimace at being so utterly and publicly unmasked. The jury's guilty verdict was a formality. Thomas Vance was sentenced to life in prison, his ledgers finally and permanently unbalanced. Justice was served, but it was a cold, hollow kind. There was no triumphant recovery of Eleanor's remains, no deathbed confession offering closure. There was only the truth and the devastating cost of it. The town of Oakwood learned that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones who hide in the shadows, but the ones who sit across from you at the breakfast table. Their secrets hidden not in a locked drawer, but behind a simple piece of trim waiting for time itself to expose them. Some secrets are so heavy, they can only stay buried for 20 years. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.